The first pro that I want to talk about with the 2022 Civic is the interior space. I think they've done a phenomenal job with the all-new interior, and this is the exact same interior that's going to be carried on into the new 2023 HR-V. It's a solid space, it's ergonomic, it's got plenty of physical buttons and switches that exude this nice, high-quality tactile feedback. Everything has a nice clicky sensation to the buttons and to the switches. This now rivals and now exceeds something like a Mazda 3 interior space, because the Mazda 3 does have a very impressive cabin space for the class. In fact, it's one of the class leading interior spaces, but where this Honda beats out the Mazda is in terms of solidity. The fit and finish is much greater with the new Civic. And staying on the topic of the interior space, the infotainment screen, the gauge cluster, all the electronics work really well, easy to use, there's no learning curve. The model I tested was the touring model, so it's fully loaded with a Bose audio system and the larger 9-inch screen. Everything was quick to respond, no real issues. But one con that I'm going to mention is going to be that Bose audio system. Sound-wise, it sounded amazing. I loved it. In fact, that's the exact sound system that I would like to have if I were to buy a Civic. However, the problem is the Bose audio system is reserved only for the touring models, which is very unfortunate because that's a $30,000 Civic. If I'm going to pay anything close to $30K, I would rather have the Civic Si with the more horsepower and the better driving dynamics. But sadly, you can't even option the Bose audio system in the lower trim level, so that's a major con for me. Now let's move on to some of the driving aspects. Let's talk about the engine and the transmission. The engine is a pro when you get it with the touring model with the turbocharged 4-cylinder engine. I do like that with the 180 horsepower. However, most people buying a Civic, they're not buying the 30K model. They're buying kind of the 25K model, Civic Sports, etc., that produce around 150 horsepower, the naturally aspirated version. And I'm sorry, even the 180 horsepower vehicle was not that quick. There's no real feeling of speed even with the 180 horsepower. So 150 is just going to feel absolutely abysmal, and it won't fit the high quality characteristic that this vehicle exudes. Now, the Cvt transmission is a pro in my opinion. Don't let that deter you. I think the Cvt responds extremely well. It's really well tuned and well calibrated. It does not deter me from my driving experience with this car. This is another reason why I prefer the Si with the 200 horsepower engine. I think that's the sweet spot for the Civic. So paying around 27-28 grand for the Si, if you can get an allocation for it, in my opinion, is worth it, especially with the manual gearbox. Now, chassis wise, handling, suspension, ride quality, all of these things, a massive pro. The new Civic basically reacts and feels just like a German car now, which can actually be a pro or a con for some people, and I'll get to that next. However, what you need to understand is the chassis that these new Honda Acura vehicles are using, they are top tier, some of the best. I love how rigid the body structure feels. The vehicle remains absolutely neutral when you're going through corners. It doesn't feel like the car is being swayed around in the wind or anything like that. It feels like a solid product, but it still gives you that nimble characteristic that a smaller car will typically give you. So handling, great. But for whatever reason, I kind of preferred the handling of the previous generation Civic a little bit more, but I'll touch on that next. Now, the ride quality is excellent, no issues there, very comfortable, but it does it without feeling like a cloud, if you will. It gives you just the right amount of feedback to let you know, it's kind of more so of a driver's car, but still rides great, don't get me wrong. The car is reasonably quiet, not as quiet as the Mazda 3, but it's up there. It's one of the more quieter vehicles in its class, and apparently the touring model is supposed to be one of the quietest Civics, but I don't know, it's probably not a huge difference between the other lesser model Civics. The thing I noticed is this new Civic, again, it feels very much like a German car, which some people might want that. However, this new Civic has lost its Japanese soul and its character, which the previous car had that. The previous car had like that Japanese kind of sharpness to it, which now the new car doesn't have. So this is kind of a con in my opinion. This now feels a lot more dull, and now it feels a little bit more distilled. It just simply lost that edge which the previous Civic kind of had. So I'm going to label that as a con for it losing its character. However, for most people, they don't care. You're still getting a solid, well-built, great handling vehicle. I just want to let the true drivers kind of know what this vehicle is kind of missing, and it's that soul and that character. Now, practicality, that's fantastic with these modern day Hondas. These are massive cars, plenty of legroom, plenty of headroom. The trunk is great. That's not really an issue with the Civics. And you can also get the hatchback version, which offers you even more trunk space, almost SUV levels of space. That's something else to consider. And finally, the looks, again, that's going to be up to you. Some people like it, some people don't. A lot of people seem to hate the previous generation Civic in terms of the way it looked. However, I personally really like this new Civic. I think it's grown up. I think it looks mature. And, some people complain that it looks too boring now. So, you can never please people in terms of the looks. That's subjective anyway. It doesn't really matter. For me, it's a pro, but it could be a con for you. But in all honesty, I don't really have too many cons with the new Civic. There's something else I forgot to mention. That's the safety of these vehicles. Honda has done a great job looking forward and building this new Civic and pretty much all their new Honda products to excel in all the latest crash safety tests that's going to be coming up. You're going to be safe in an accident in one of these newer Honda products, and also the safety tech, all of that works great, not an issue. So aside from its kind of dead feeling character and the lack of the Bose audio system in the lower trim levels of the Civic, I really don't have too many complaints with this car. And I guess the price. I mean, the price is a little bit steep, but honestly, the price is warranted. It makes sense because this car is really a high quality driving experience. It's an experience that far exceeds its price level, if you will. It's definitely one of the class leaders along with the Mazda 3. I think this is a fantastic car. Other vehicles do have their own certain little characteristics that you can find entertaining, like a manual transmission Toyota Corolla SE is strangely satisfying to drive the piss out of, so that's something to look into. Plus, it's a Toyota. The Hyundai Kia products are great when you buy them as a base model, like a base model Elantra is an excellent choice for around 19 to 20 grand. However, once you start tacking on the options and the price gets higher, I kind of start to lean towards the Mazda 3 and the Honda Civic. So again, depends on availability in your market. This is a crazy time that we're living in. If you can find a Civic at MSRP or ideally below MSRP, then I think you should take advantage of it. You're not going wrong here. There's plenty of space, practicality, and fuel efficiency is another thing I forgot to mention. It's always going to be great with these CVT transmission vehicles. Hondas almost always far exceed their fuel economy numbers, so that shouldn't be an issue for you. It's a great car. It's one that I highly recommend. That's my pros and cons video on the Civic. If you want to see my full review, I'm going to post it on the end screen here, so click on that next.